Okay, so tonight we are reading for the first time The Winter's Tale, which is another First Folio play published from a Ralph Crane transcript of Shakespeare's working papers, so not entirely dissimilar to Cymbeline, which we read last week. Now, those papers were the only manuscript that was available in late 1622 when the play was sent to be printed. The prompt book had gone missing, and the following year, the play had to be relicensed when the King's Men wanted to revive it, and this was done without a fee after Hemmings gave his word to the Master of the Revels that they were going to perform the play exactly as it had been licensed 12 years earlier, with no additional scenes and no additional speeches, nothing that would require somebody to look at the play anew. Um, so, what we are looking at, therefore, is a play that was a text that was printed in December 1622, published in November 1623, but from a manuscript that existed in or came into existence in 1611. Or 1610 to 11. And it's a version of the play that hadn't yet been prepared for the stage, meaning that it isn't only uncut, it also contains some inconsistencies that might have been ironed out when it progressed to the next phase of its existence, the prompt book. That is always assuming that certain inconsistencies really mattered to the acting company. And it also contains a sequence in which the country pastimes, which you might think are rather long, are extended by the addition of some dancing satyrs. And this was the last part of the play to be written once the company had acquired the satyr suits, which they did at some point after New Year's Day 1611, when they played the satyrs in the court masque Oberon the Fairy Prince, and were given the costumes as part of their fee. And the point of adding the dance to The Winter's Tale was surely to make early use of the costumes, which tells us that there wasn't any other play coming up into the repertory which might have a satyr sequence usefully written into it. So The Winter's Tale is doing that pastoral bit of the generic mix. But this wasn't part of the play as Shakespeare originally conceived it, because the writing must have been already well advanced by the start of the year. We've got a direct record of a performance at the Globe on the 15th of May, 1611, when Simon Forman saw it. And it was imitated, its phraseology was imitated in other plays that date from the summer of that year, including Middleton's No Wit, No Help Like a Woman's, which seems to have premiered in June and obviously had to be written and go through pre-production in the months before that. So the likelihood is that The Winter's Tale was ready to go quite early in the year, but not quite so early as to premiere in January, because if it was in that state of readiness, the satyr material would have been inserted into the prompt book, bypassing the working papers altogether, and we just wouldn't have that sequence now because it would have gone when the prompt book was stolen. So the likelihood is that Shakespeare wrote the extra bit, the satyr dance, in January. And it sounds to me like when he wrote it, he put in a sort of grumpy personal comment on having to write this extra bit in. Here has been too much homely foolery already, it is said. And the play would then have been delivered and tidied up for production. So it would have premiered in February or early March, in time for Middleton to see it and write his own play. And indeed, other people saw it as well, like Francis Beaumont, as well as Simon Forman. The story as Shakespeare found it in Pandosto, Robert Greene's novel, only really gives four of the sharer parts: Leontes, Polixenes, the Old Shepherd, and Florizel. And Shakespeare generates a fifth sharer level part by amalgamating two smaller characters. There is the suborned but honest cupbearer who doesn't have a name, and there is Florizel's faithful servant, or does he have a name? I can't remember, but it'll be in the longer version of this. Anyway, he incorporates those two characters, those two bit parts, into the much larger and more complex role of Camillo, who consequently facilitates both escapes in the two halves of the play. The other sharer roles who aren't part of Pandosto are the clown, Antigonus, and Autolycus. Two of these arise from particular company needs. One is to service the clown, and the other is to service the principal singer, which means that the clown is going to be played by Armin, Quelle Surprise, and Autolycus will be Underwood. The clown has the comically taxonomical and comically macabre tone that's often found in Armin's roles, notably in the clown's first scene as he tries to juggle the two concurrent disasters of the shipwreck and Antigonus becoming the bear's supper. The introspective, soliloquizing Leontes is obviously a Burbage part. The bespectacled, wistful Camillo is also fairly obviously Hemmings, not doing Angry Dad this time, but doing something else in his range, and the specs are the giveaway. Florizel is the Juve role, so he's going to be cook. He follows in the Condell tradition by taking his clothes off at one point. And that leaves us with four sharers, Shakespeare, Condell, Cowley, and Lowin, to play the three remaining major adult parts. I propose Condell playing Polixenes with his moralizing propriety, Cowley playing the semi-clown role of the Old Shepherd, and Lowin playing the compromised Antigonus. And as for Shakespeare, well, who will Shakespeare play? Surely he will play the character who represents himself as the author of The Winter's Tale. That is the chorus time. And I suspect that he may double the role of the third gentleman, who's got an awful lot to say in his single scene towards the end of the play. It's a sort of sharer level part, or so it seems to me, even though it's very restricted. Now, the Pandosto story offers three female characters, and the two important ones are those who become Hermione and Perdita. The other one is Mopsa, who's the shepherd's wife, and she doesn't appear in The Winter's Tale at all, although Shakespeare does take her name for a different character. And evidently that's because the role of Mopsa, or the character of Mopsa, isn't suitable for developing into an apprentice part, certainly at the level that it would need to be. But it would be too complex for any of the junior apprentices. So instead, Shakespeare reorients the old shepherd's confidant relationship towards his son, the clown, which helps him solve his problem of making something for Armin to do. It's the last thing he ever does for Armin. And it creates a completely new apprentice one role in Paulina, so that the parts match up with the particular strengths of the two senior apprentices, James Sands for Paulina, Richard Robinson for Hermione, with the statue scene another element added to capitalize on Robinson's particular skill in motionless acting. Now, Apprentice 3 was James Jones. So far, he's only had tiny parts, but on the other hand, he's just been promoted. He's Apprentice 3 now, as I say. He'll therefore be in line to play Perdita. It's a big step up from anything we've seen him do before. It's got 25 cues and 167 lines. And it's likely that he wasn't very good, which would explain why the company decided to get rid of him when his master, Armin, left a few months later. There's a lot of negotiations that go on, and eventually they find him place in another acting company. They don't want to keep him in the way that they do want to keep Sands, for instance, when his master, Phillips, leaves and then dies. But by the time the play reached the stage, there were at least 5 apprentices in the company, probably 6. The junior ones are all recent hirings. Walter Haynes, who was indentured in March 1610, George Birch, 4th of July 1610, and possibly John Wilson, 18th of February 1611, which is too late to have been planned for in the writing of the play, though it's interesting that Wilson doesn't seem to have shone as an actor, but became one of the company's core musical contributors right through to the Civil War, after which he became Professor of Music at Oxford. And that gives us ample scope to cover the 4 remaining apprentice level roles, assuming that the tiny parts of the ladies attending on Hermione in the Mamillius scene are sub-apps, unless, of course, one of them is Emilia before she's got her name. Emilia and Mamillius only appear in the early Sicilian scenes. Dorcas and Mopsa only appear at the Bohemian sheep shearing. So the 4 parts can be played by 2 apprentices doubling. I'm assuming they're likely to be Haynes and Birch. I don't know which way round. It's very difficult to call because they really are only 4 months apart in terms of their seniority in the company. Dorcas and Mopsa are those singing roles. They participate with Autolycus in Song 5, which is Get You Hence, for I Must Go. So it's tempting to drop in Wilson against all likelihood. But on the other hand, it is also noticeable that there's a fair amount of singing coming up for all of the junior apprentices in the subsequent plays in the repertory, as we're going to see. So my proposed cast list is Burbage as Leontes, Underwood as Autolycus, Hemmings as Camillo, Condell as Polixenes, Cook as Florizel, Cowley as the Old Shepherd, Lowin as Antigonus, Shakespeare as Time, possibly doubling with the Third Gentleman, Armin as the Clown, probably Ghoulie as Dion and Cleomenes. Don't know which way round. Let's see if we've got any indication of their physicality. Sands as Paulina, Robinson certainly Hermione. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Jones as Perdita, and Emilia, Mopsa, Dorcas, and Mamillius doubled amongst Haynes and Birch. So let's see how we get on with the play.